What's up, everybody? Tricks Ridiculous back with another video, and in this one I'm going to be going over my ranged high cal Black Widow build. This is probably what I'll be bringing into the cloning labs with Black Widow. There are other ways to play Widow, but this is probably how I'm going to be playing her. So I'm going to go through kind of how I'm building her, what I'm using, and then what other options you can use if you don't have the exact same pieces, or you maybe just want to play it a little differently but still keep the bones of the build together. Now you may be noticing right off the bat I'm actually on 174, but that's fine. The only piece that's one off is just this one here. So I'll be getting that to 175 in the next raid or event. I do have a 165 piece, but I just don't want to infuse it because I actually like the stats of the other one too for a different build. But this will be 175 pretty much in a week's time. And we all know, at the time of this recording, patch 2.6 is coming out very, very soon. So this build is going to be even better than what I'm showcasing here. But the bones of how I'm building it and what I'm going to be using is not going to be changing. So let's get right into it. Before we do, be sure to like the video, especially if you want more build guides. Let me know by liking the video. I definitely plan to do a lot more build guides across all characters, especially after the buff patch comes out, really trying to relook at all characters and see, what builds we can come up with. So super excited for that. But otherwise, let's go ahead and get right into it. So as I always do with these, I'm going to go over the gear pieces and show off the skills. Now, looking at the gear pieces, I'll start right off here with the melee slot. Now, I'm using just a Discordant Grasps. It's got Precision Valor, pretty good roll. Not the best, but certainly not the worst. Really, this piece could be a little better, but some of the good pieces about this, it's pretty much just a stat stick more than anything, and having that 15% increased damage while invisible is active is extremely powerful. What you would ideally want instead is the 35% increased crit attack damage while invisibility is active. That's slightly better, but it's not too big of a deal breaker. It is still just they're both good perks to have. So I certainly wouldn't shard a good piece, a good stat stick just because it has the invisibility over the crit attack damage, but this is basically what we're going to be using. And then a nice piece to have is the Lethal Vibranium Conduit. When you're defeating an enemy with Vibranium, you send the Sonic Conduit buff to all heroes. That does also work as a bit of a heroic charge burst, if you didn't know. So that'll actually charge your heroics up, and you'll notice that we are using a Vibranium ranged high cal slot too, so that's going to work really nicely with that as well. Moving over to the slot 2, so I'm using this here. It's the Discordant Arsenal, and Precision Resilience doesn't have Valor. If it had Valor, it would definitely be a little better. But basically what it's got here, it's got High Cal Vibranium and Arsenal Boon. You really want both of those perks. Obviously high cal Vibranium because it's a high cal build. If you're on PC and you're using a keyboard and mouse, Pistol Shot could be better. But if you're on, console, Xbox, or PlayStation, it's a little, in my experience, a little difficult to control the pistol. So high cal could be better in that case. But I like high cal. You can certainly go with pistol. Ideally, you can get this a little better. So you see this piece here. This is a near perfect piece for me. You'll see how it has Valor and has, unfortunately, it just doesn't have the high cal. It still has the increased crit chance from weapons, which is what you want, but it has the receiving accelerator. This is the one piece that I don't actually have on my main piece that I'm using right now. I'm hoping to get it at some point. But you can see here, when receiving the Sonic Conduit, ranged attack damage to enemies' weak points increases by 40%. That's huge, right? Because we know from our one slot that we're going to be triggering that Lethal Vibranium Conduit. We're going to be considered a receiver quite a bit. And this is a little bit, this sounds like this perk's a little deceiving, right? It says that it sends the sonic conduit, but then it says all heroes are considered receivers. So this doesn't turn you into a sender. When you get a vibranium kill, you become a receiver. Everyone just becomes receivers, okay? So granting perks don't really work. You want the receiving perks to work. So in this case, you get an extra 40% to enemy weak points. So that's, of course, headshots. This is a really good perk. You definitely want this. Like I said, unfortunately, I just didn't happen to get it with high cal. So the build still works without it, but definitely if you're looking to kind of replicate what I'm doing here, definitely just be on the lookout for a piece like this one with high cal. Or like I said, if you prefer pistol, or even especially if you're on keyboard and mouse, you can certainly use this as well. It will be absolutely nasty. But otherwise, go with the high cal. But either way, you should be fine. The most important thing is, of course, having that vibranium and then having the 15% increased crit chance from weapons. And then, of course, just having good stats on it, right? Moving over to the defensive slot. So really not much here. There really aren't too many good perks in the defensive, chest piece slot for Widow. This is really just a stat stick more than anything. So you could see Valor, Resilience, precision, and then the only perk you really want to be looking for is that Stealth Breaker, 15% increased damage while invisibility is active. You could also go with the Vibranium Reverberation, which just does 25% more to enemies that are affected by Vibranium. That is good too. The only thing is that you're going to be kind of one-shotting a lot of smaller enemies anyway, so the 15% while invisible is pretty much going to be active all the time for you for your initial hits versus your secondary kind of follow-up hits, if that makes sense. So it might sound like the 25% on Vibranium infected enemies would be better, but it's not necessarily, because, like I said, you're going to be killing most enemies with one shot. So you kind of want the damage on the initial hit versus having to wait until they're Vibraniumed up, if that makes sense. And then coming over to the heroic slot, so I'm using, of course, the Red Room Coil. This is still the best piece on Widow, in my opinion. I have one here with fantastic stats, Valor, Resolve, Precision, and it's got, if you know the perks on this, guaranteed crit when hitting an enemy from behind while invisible, increased damage while invisibility is active, and then increased duration of invisibility by 3 seconds. So that's really fantastic. So we've got a lot of increased damage while invisibility is active. Guaranteed crits, right? So because we're going to get a lot of guaranteed crits alongside of our here it is, the crit chance from all weapons in general, we're really going to be critting quite a bit. So you'll notice we don't even have damage buff on here. We don't need it. You do not need damage buff. You don't need targeted buff, targeted tachyon surge. You don't need any of that stuff. And the reason is Widow doesn't really get a good rate on that anyway. So if you do have like a targeted buff piece on Widow, I think I might have deleted all of mine just because of how bad they are. For whatever reason, I think it's mostly because of the high or the full auto shot with Widow. Her percentage chance to trigger targeted buff is significantly lower than other heroes. So if you look at like a Kate Bishop or a Hawkeye, it'll probably be something like 35 to 40% chance on crit to trigger targeted buff or to trigger targeted tachyon surge. But with Black Widow, it's something in the neighborhood of like 8 or 9%. It's less than 10% chance per crit. I think they probably did that just because they assumed if you're using full auto, it's just going to trigger immediately if it was something like 40%. But unfortunately, you kind of, it kind of screws you if you're using high cal, right? Because you're still kind of looking at only like 10% chance to, trigger a targeted buff, but you're using high cal, right? So it's not going to work out very well for you. So you don't really need it. And, since they took away the crit chance for the targeted buff, it's really just a flat damage buff, which is not as good anymore. A damage buff is still an incredibly powerful perk, but you don't really need it on Widow, right? Because she's going to be critting anyway, pretty much all the time. So you really just want things that increase your damage flat and increase your crit attack damage. All right, now some other perks and things you could run here. Like I said, you definitely want the critical attack damage if possible. You could, if you find yourself that you really want to be up invisible a little more, you could definitely get a piece that has increased heroic charge rate. Where's mine? Here it is. While invisibility is active, I would recommend this one over the Shadow Ops. Shadow Ops a little inconsistent. You can't really get it going. You know, with Widow consistently. The invisibility is much more consistent, so I would strongly recommend that one instead. Yeah, and then other than that, there's really not much else you would want here. Like I said, the lethal vibranium is pretty important. If you're always playing in a group and someone else is giving you the sonic conduit buff, you can use something like a receiving amplifier, which just gives a little more status effect to your shots, which is fine. Other than that, though, I mean, you're in pretty good shape with all of this gear. There's really not too much else that I would recommend, including, you know, discordant gear in other slots as well. So that's what I'm using there. Over to the artifacts, I'm using double yellow ISO, so we're going high Valor, right? Because Widow can guarantee crits, Valor is our best friend, right? We want that damage multiplication, so we're going high Valor. I've actually got two of the exact same piece here. This rotates in with the vendor once in a while, or you can just do the offline method, try to find it. You'll see here increased damage from power attacks. That's extremely useful when you're charging up your high caliber shot. It'll give you essentially roughly about, looks like 24% more damage from that. Now, you can get these to roll with increased crit chance from power attacks with the same Valor rolls, right? So that could be really good as well. Like I said, if you want to kind of amp up that crit chance, that honestly may be better. Sometimes it's not as consistent to get behind enemies. And so, you know, even just when you're not invisible, still being able to crit consistently with that Valor, that can be really good as well. But I'm going with flat damage here. It's really either or, kind of dealer's choice. And then I'm using the Sacred Nornstone. Like I said, you don't have damage buff on this character, but for really big hitters, right, for the big Claw Eye or even Claw himself or Super Adaptoid, you can just activate this and you'll have your damage boost, right? Or even just random enemies. You'll get that damage buff pretty much without having to actually have it on the kit. Now, I know you might think that that's inconsistent, but I assure you, you really don't need this for 99% of enemies. You can literally one-shot pretty much every enemy in the game, even, you know, shielded exos, shielded adaptoids, dreadbots. As long as you're invisible, you're absolutely wrecking things. You're going to be completely destroying things for upwards of 600,000 a shot. Okay, and that's not even including damage that your taser dart's going to be doing, especially with your Valor, with your crit, right? So you really only want to pop the damage buff when you absolutely have to go to town in a DPS phase. That'll just give you that little extra oomph. If you don't want that, you can certainly go with a Tactagon. I am not using a Tactagon. I prefer this, but you can do it. It'll be a little more consistent, well-rounded. It'll just give you that little extra burst of damage, you know, for all status damage and then on enemies that are affected by your vibranium. But like I said, you're going to be killing most enemies, even up to brutal difficulty, in one shot. At least any small enemy is dead in one shot. And then even the shielded exos, shielded adaptoids, whatever, they're 2 shots maximum, or even just like a taser dart and a one shot and they're done. So you really don't have to worry about it too much. So that's why I just keep this on for bosses. So that's pretty much it for the gear. You can see from the hero stats, we're high in precision, high in valor, right? So no might, no intensity, no proficiency, and we've got pretty respectable resilience and resolve. So you can see we're not slouching on defense. Pretty good armor, decent resolve, certainly not a glass cannon in any way, but still having very high valor to scale that crit. That's going to affect, of course, our taser dart as well. And then our precision, just really, pretty respectable precision. You could flip-flop these, but I prefer the valor with Widow, especially with the with the guaranteed crits. For most other characters, I might flip it back the other way if you can't get as high crit, especially since damage buff has been changed. But, you know, just having these two Valor ISOs is what really puts us higher in Valor than in Precision. So this is what I go with. It works extremely, extremely well. All right, so coming over to the skills. So there's really only a few that you really want to have. So this one here, Night Terror, is very important. So basically this increases the duration of your invisibility by 3 seconds and increases your crit attack chance by 25%. Okay, so basically gives you a little extra duration on your invisible and increases your crit chance by 25% while you are invisible. Now, I understand that being behind enemies, you do guarantee a crit, and that does come up often, but not always, especially for bosses, right? So if you think like Big Claw's Eye, Super Adaptoid, even Claw himself, I mean, you're not guaranteed to be behind these enemies for a DPS phase. And frankly, you're going to waste time if you try to do it. So I go with the flat 25% crit chance here and the extra duration. I think this is fantastic. If you're struggling, you know, with your uptime, you can go with something like Shadow Gifts. This is probably what a lot of people have already. And this is basically when you defeat an enemy with Veil of Shadows active, it guarantees a heroic orb drop. It says 35%, but it's actually guaranteed. So this will really, you know, if you do this, you're going to sacrifice a little bit of your crit and your damage overall, but you'll be able to just generate orbs pretty much nonstop and stay in your super nonstop. This is really good. I can't really argue with this perk either, but just for the pure DPS, I go with Night Terror. And then coming over here, I use the Immortal Cloak, increase crit attack chance for teammates in Veil of Shadows by 30%. You can go with this one too, Vicious Obscurum. Not as good, just kind of extends the duration, but if they're not getting the boost, they should probably just stick with this one. Really good, you know, if you just want to hit your teammates, especially like I say, like Claw's Big Eye phase, or just, you know, any DPS phase in general, Super Adaptoid. You know, hit your team with the invisibility. This is basically like having a Team Spirit from Ms. Marvel. You know, they're going to get a huge crit chance boost. Your whole team's going to be happy with it. So definitely just go with this. I use Taser Dart for the Assault Heroic. I think it is the best one. It's certainly the best one, I think, for like Big Boss DPS, because you can keep so many charges of it and you can just kind of unload them. Especially, you know, we're stacking a lot of Valor, and even from behind guaranteed crits does apply to Taser Dart. And even when we're invisible, right, we get that extra damage or that extra crit from being invisible. So it's very likely that we'll just stick someone with a Taser Dart and it'll just crit them nonstop. And as you know, this guarantees apply shock damage. So that's going to battery effect with our Vibranium high caliber shot, right? So for bosses, you usually want to start off, you pop all of your heroics, and then you essentially, you know, bip them with the Taser Dart, and then your high caliber shots are just going to be absolutely melting them. Or you can kind of go vice versa on it and, you know, back and forth. Hit them with one Taser Dart, hit them with, like, you know, 2 high caliber shots. You've already chunked them quite a bit at that point. And then once they're vibraniumed up as well, you unload with the other 2 Taser Darts or 3 Taser Darts. They're all going to be doing battery effect now as well, especially if they're crits. They're going to be ticking. You're going to have 3 different Taser Darts ticking for 200,000 a tick. So really, really strong there for big time DPS. And then here I just go with the additional charge just because you want to unload these when you have them. And especially, like I said, for larger enemies like shielded, you know, exos, really, really tanky enemies, a singular Taser Dart and then a high caliber shot is usually enough to take them out. Maybe 2 high calibers if they're lucky. But that's pretty much it. So you definitely want to keep as many of these in the bag as you can. And then coming over to the ultimate, pretty straightforward. I just use Galvanic Bite. I think this is the best one just for this particular setup. The other 2 don't really do anything for our setup here. And then I use increased extended duration. Now, you might not think that the Power Surge does much, but actually what it does, kind of hidden, doesn't really say it in the stats. But it's I think it's this right here. The damage and reload speed increased by 20%. So it's going to give you that kind of charge time. It does say it, but a lot of people kind of miss this. But when you're in your Power Surge, you want to be using your charged high caliber shot. It actually charges very fast. It's way faster than trying to just spam the non-charged shot. You can usually spam the non-charged shot for the majority of enemies and it's plenty of damage, but while you're in Power Surge, you should you should charge it up. It doesn't really take away from your DPS as far as getting off shots. And it's essentially way, way worth it. And that's pretty much it for the specialty. The mastery, there's really not much to go over here. Definitely just take a screenshot of this. It's all pretty standard stuff that you probably have on Widow. It's all the obvious ones that make sense. All the ranged perks. I use the extra ammo perk instead of the reload perk. Pretty straightforward there. Nothing too fancy. And then, of course, coming over to the champion skills, I probably wasted more of these than I needed to, but really the only ones you want are crit damage, crit chance, heroic charge rate, perk chance, and then fortification for that defense. Other than that, the rest of them are a waste of time. They don't really do anything. So just focus on those and you should be good to go. But anyway, that is the Widow. Like I said, you can see from the stats here and from the stats here, it absolutely tanks things. It's so strong. It runs a train over everything. And it's not even a glass cannon. So very, very high assassination damage for single target. But, like I said, when I say single target, it just means you have to hit the enemies one at a time. But even for, groups of enemies, you're just picking them off one at a time, absolutely destroying them. Very, very strong build. Anyway, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Are you playing your Widow similar to this? Did this help you? For your Widow, I've got a ton more builds. Let me know what character you'd like to see a build for next. I've got a few more in mind, including additional Widow builds. But let me know down in the comments what you'd like to see next or how you're building your characters and who you're going into cloning labs with on the first day. Let me know. Be sure to like the video if you like build guides. Be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. That's it from me, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one.